Okay, good morning. I guess we may as well get started. Thanks so much for coming. I'm Bill Sundstrom. I'm in the economics department here at Santa Clara University and affiliated with Step Up Silicon Valley. And this is one of a continuing series of learning and development programs that Step Up Silicon Valley and the university, Santa Clara University, co-sponsor. And we're really delighted with today's speaker and topic. Just a couple of quick announcements and acknowledgements. First of all, thanks to Almaz Nagash and Adeline Gallego Ramos, who are kind of the Step Up Silicon Valley end of this operation and do a lot of the infrastructure work and help us. Almaz procured our speaker today, so I'll give her full credit for that. And here on campus, my administrative assistant in the economics department, Marianne Farag, who's not here, but does a lot of the sort of local arrangements, and our dean of the Levy School of Business, Drew Starbird, who's here today, is the one who signs the check for the food. So thank you, Drew. And we're delighted.
Sure is good.
So please eat up because we have more than we need. Quick announcement: the next one of these presentations will be on Thursday, May 7th, here at Santa Clara. And it's a presentation by Professor Hilary Hoynes, who's an economist and a public policy specialist at Berkeley. And she's going to be talking about 50 years, 51 now, I guess, years of the war on poverty. She's done a lot of path-breaking work on that. So you'll get more information on that. For those of you who are not Step Up Silicon Valley people, Step Up is an organization that's been around for a while. It's a social change network, social innovation network, I guess is the preferred term, and the goal is to bring together a wide variety of people, from social service providers to the public sector to the education sector in the valley here, to try to find creative ways to work together to reduce and maybe someday eliminate poverty and inequality in our community. So you can learn a lot more about them on their website, stepupsv.org. Welcome to Santa Clara. If you haven't been here before, this is the oldest university in the state of California, founded in 1851, Jesuit school, and we have about 5,400 undergrads at this point, and that's a number of professional programs and a strong commitment to social justice. And this is one small piece of that effort. So let me, without further ado, introduce the speaker today is Scott Myers-Lipton, and he is a professor of sociology over at San Jose State, and he's going to be talking about his hot off the presses book, which you can procure at a bargain price, and maybe even get signed by the author. And he's I think a well-known figure in the San Jose community, in particular for his efforts with his students to push through the successful minimum wage bill that recently passed in San Jose, and I think is widely admired and influential around the country as an important effort to move in the direction of a more just and living wage for our working citizens. So I'm going to hand it over to Scott and let him take it away. And I guess he's going to talk for a little while, and we'd really like to just open it up to conversation after that. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
I can talk. Let me talk here, and then I might move around. So thank you for that introduction. I'd like to start by telling a story. The story starts off 5 years ago, in the spring of 2010. And if you remember back to spring 2010, not that long ago, inequality was not a major concern of the nation, as it is now. Occupy Wall Street had yet to occur, nor had their most recent campaigns to raise the minimum wage, which started here in San Jose but has spread around the country, nor had the fight for 15 or the Our Walmart campaign. None of that had begun. So the story begins when a San Jose State student, a daughter of a farm worker, was in an after-school program here in San Jose. And at that school, the student, her name was Maricela Castro, saw something that was very disturbing. She saw kids taking food from the after-school program and put it in her backpack. Put it in the backpack. And so she approached the kids and said, "Why are you doing that?" You're taking the food and quote-unquote stealing, because the food was for the program, taking the food and putting it in a backpack. And what she heard was this: there's not enough food at home for my brothers and sisters, and they have to eat tonight. And so that was, she was not happy about that. As many of us in our own work, when we begin this work in social justice, we hear something like that, and we want to know more. So she asked the question, which is an appropriate one: do your parents work? And they assured, oh yeah, they work. In fact, not only did my dad work one job, he works 2 jobs. But they make such poor pay at minimum wage, she found out, that there wasn't not enough to actually make it all happen in their family, make the ends meet. So she came back to my class, and with indignation, she said, you know, Profe, we have to do something. This can't continue for another generation. We have to do something. And I kind of meekly said, you know, this is a class, we're talking about it. We don't do anything in this class. We're analyzing. Like we, as professors, staff here, you know, that we know what we do, we analyze. So I said, but I am teaching a class next semester. And the class is social action. And that class, you come in and you have an idea and you try to make it happen. You try to implement a policy idea that you have. So that student, bless her heart, right? She decided to take the class. She got 3 other people to be involved in that. And that was the core. That was the beginning of what became the Measure D campaign. And now fast forward a few years, hundreds of meetings later, right? Hundreds of meetings that we had in over the summer, when we had now 8 students and Ponte Guevara from Sacred Heart, and then more with labor and faith communities and other nonprofits, United Way and Catholic Charities, and the Jewish community joining us in the faith community. We, kind of surprisingly, even to ourselves, enacted the greatest increase in the minimum wage in the history of the country. 25% in one shot. So we are proud of that, right? And I guess if I say anything today, is that would be one of the points I'd want to make, is that a small group of people can bring about major policy change in the country, because we knew we didn't have the power to change in DC. We were aware of that. We didn't have the political power, but we knew if we could change in San Jose, maybe we could shoot it out to other places, and of course that is what has happened. So, that would be my one hope, is that you say, we can't, when people say, oh, an economic bill of rights, not possible for the country, forget it. I would argue, because I've seen it happen, that you can bring about change with a group of people that at first doesn't have a lot of political power. So that would be my one major point. What would be the takeaway? My dad always used to tell me, he was a toy salesman, and he'd go to toy meetings back in New York. I said, why do you go to those meetings, Dad? He says, if I get one thing out of a meeting, it was worth me flying to New York in the freezing cold. So one thing. So that would be my one thing, is that you could bring back to your people and the people you talk to, you can bring about change in some major ways. So the most obvious one that we want to do is to get $4,000 more a year to working class people, by the way, many of which were my students. $4,000. That's why we did the minimum wage campaign. We wanted to do that, right? And we did, right? So when people talk about San Jose's minimum wage, they always talk about the effect on the economy, which, by the way, has been minimal, right? Unemployment now is down another % since last year. It's down to 4.6%. So the minimum wage did not have the impact that our detractors said, the increase. Our detractors said, what was the word of the mayor at the time? Said it was going to be, I'm trying to think, how did he say it? It was like a nuclear holocaust. I forget the exact words, but it was an economic downturn of epic proportions. But it didn't happen, right? We've actually increased in our economic activity. We have all the data on that if you're interested in that. But I want to go back to that class, because that class was important, because it was in that class that the minimum wage came out of, and that class that I teach, and I still teach today, called Wealth, Poverty, and Privilege. Because that's going to get to us my second major point. The first one is we can bring about change. The second major point is this economic bill of rights. So that class, we've been studying about our state of wealth and poverty in this country. That's what that class looks at. What's the state of our wealth and our poverty in the country? And this is what the students learned. the United States is #1 in childhood poverty. The United States is #1 in income inequality. And the United States is #1 in wealth inequality in the industrialized world. So I like to tell my students, I actually have them do this. I won't make you do it, but I have them do it. We're #1. I have them chant that, because we always chant it. We go to games, we like to be #1. But we are #1 in all the wrong things when it comes to kids and when it comes to working families. We're #1 in these 3 areas. So, right, why are we #1 in childhood poverty and income inequality and wealth inequality? All in the context of we're one of the wealthiest countries in the history of the world. So we analyze that, right? We first talk about the U.S. children live in poverty, particularly because they have women, the moms, who are in poverty. If you look at women, 18 to 64, the poverty rate is 15.4%. Children, 20%, right? And to make matters worse, we have a stagnant, our low-wage workers are not moving upward. They're not even staying the same. They're actually getting less secure. They're 4%. They earn 4% less than they did in the 1980s. Second, we're #1 in income inequality because we have a stagnant middle class. Today, the median income is $51,900, which is about where it was in 1995. Again, adjusting this for inflation. And third, we're #1 in income and wealth inequality because we have, while the middle has stagnated, the bottom has actually decreased, the top has done spectacular, right? Spectacular. And we know that because we are here in Silicon Valley. We see it all around us. The top 1% has had strong growth. Their income was up 120% over the past 30 years. The top 1% now controls 40% of the wealth, up from 33% 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And the top 20% controls 89% of all the wealth. The result? Extreme inequality, right? Extreme inequality. And that's the title of my book, Ending Extreme Inequality. And then the question is, why is it happening? Why is that happening? And I'm going to say something that probably many of you in this room are not going to like. My students don't like it. My dad doesn't like it. I even had to get used to it. But here it is. Capitalism, as it's practiced in the United States, causes poverty and inequality.
Yep.
Capitalism, as it's practiced in the United States, causes poverty and inequality. And that's outside the political realm. I get it. It's outside what you can hear any Democrat, any Republican. They're not going to say that. But from my 30 years of studying and thinking about it, that's what all the factors, all the analysis I've done says is. And I say, don't put me in a Marxist box. I'm not a Marxist ideologically. Or in my day-to-day life, I come from a small business family. My dad's a small businessman. I have a family business. And I'm not saying anything different than the 2 greatest Americans of the 20th century, in my mind, Martin Luther King and Franklin Roosevelt said, both of which said, poverty is caused by capitalism and inequality. Roosevelt argued that capitalism, left to itself, creates too much poverty, since it doesn't provide enough living wage jobs. FDR believed that American capitalism unleashed creativity and technology. I would agree, but at the same time creates the economic insecurity and the poverty that we have today. Roosevelt's solution was to embrace capitalism's creativity, but limit its tendency toward poverty and extreme inequality. Martin King said the same thing. We don't want to hear that part of Martin. We have the 1963 I Have a Dream speech, but we want to hear that last speech in 67 and 68. King concluded that U.S. capitalism was structurally flawed, since it didn't create enough good-paying jobs. So there were always going to be millions of people in poverty, he said. King stated this is a direct quote, "In this other America, thousands and thousands of people walk the streets in search of jobs that do not exist." And this is again a quote. In other words, whether the economy is strong or in recession, there's still going to be poverty. And we all witnessed that in the Clinton eras. The greatest economic expansion in the history of the world, that occurred in the country. We still had over 11% of people in poverty at the end of it. So in addition to the structural flaw of capitalism, changes over the past 30 years in the world economy has made poverty and inequality grow even more. Globalization has offshored millions of our U.S. jobs. The tax policies have changed in favor of the 1%. And just give you one, there's many examples, but the capital gains tax, which was reduced from 35 to 15%. Unions have been weakened as those jobs have been shipped offshores, and of course they've been attacked here at home. And the minimum wage has been kept stagnant. So if you're in my class, those are the things that we spend days and days analyzing, and they're in the book, that analysis. So, and my search for this really was my students again, because they're like, okay, I got the analysis, like what do we do? What can we offer as a solution? My students are very practical that way. And when I started this 15 years ago, I was like, I'm not sure. Can I get back to you on it? So I started thinking about it. So in the book, Ending Extreme Inequality, I argue the solution is the Economic Bill of Rights. What we need, this is pretty bold, I think we have to be bold in these times of extreme inequality. What we need is a new social contract. And that's what I'm calling for. A new social contract between the individual and the state. We need a new social contract that not just affirms our political rights, which are absolutely necessary. Well, that's why I never could be a communist, because it denies political rights on that level. We need our political rights, but also our economic rights. And it's okay to have both. We want both. This idea for an economic bill of rights, or what FDR called a second bill of rights, was announced by President Roosevelt in 1944, a State of the Union speech. I would recommend all of you go look at it. My students look at it, they're like, I've never seen that piece. Why haven't they seen that? Why haven't they seen that image of FDR laying out the second Bill of Rights and calling for it in the State of the Union address in 44, where he outlined these rights, and they're simple actually. What I love about it, minimum wage won because it was simple, right? Can't make enough on $8 an hour. We got 60% of and we had very little money to spend on our campaign. Just that message, $8 is not enough. It was a simple message, and San Joseans said absolutely $8 is not enough. It's got to be at least 10. This is a simple message too. We don't have our economic rights, and these are the rights that he identified: the right to a job, the right to a living wage, the right to a decent home. I love the way he doesn't say a home, a decent home. The right to a good education, the right to adequate medical care, and the right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment. And what's interesting when you start doing the analysis and all those, and I can't do them all, right? There's 6 of them. That's why you have to buy the book. That's my sell. We got to buy the book. I'm going to talk about 2 of the rights, and then I'll stop and we can talk. And if there's energy for it, I could do a third right. But there's only so much you can do in a very short time. But what's interesting about all these rights is that we're the leaders in many of them. For example, education. We're the leaders. You all know that? The top 20%, we outperform Norway, Finland, Singapore. We're number 1 in education, the top 20% of our country. Do you all know that? Number 1. But our bottom 20% is second to dead last between Mexico and Chile, I think. So if you have that extreme inequality, we appear average. So everyone's like concerned about the average educator, it's a little bit below average. But if you look at it more in depth, if you pull back, you see we actually do very well, but very poorly. And that's the same thing, by the way, with healthcare. Exactly the same thing. We actually provide the best healthcare in the world if you're in the top 20%. So I don't think that's right. My mom taught me that, as a good Catholic, good woman. That's not right. We're born equal. We should have some level of equality. Clearly, the Economic Bill of Rights is not a radical solution. Everyone says, you're a radical. No, it's not radical. We're not calling for the overthrow of capitalism. I'm calling for a structural reform of capitalism. I'm calling for a progressive American solution. And I think that's key, by the way, is that we don't like to learn anything from France or from Sweden or from any other. We want to have it ours. And this is an American solution. It was put out by an American. It's in the context of the Bill of Rights. We all understand, well, actually, I don't know if my students understand the Bill of Rights. If I asked what the 10 were, they might get the First Amendment, right? Maybe the Second. Maybe, what else? Maybe I don't know, maybe any more. But they have a general idea, So it's in this context of a Bill of Rights. So this is the second thing I want you to remember, that an economic Bill of Rights is the solution, I believe, to the problem of this extreme inequality. So it's a bold vision, and it's one that was brought, Roosevelt put forward that idea, And then 30 years later, Truman tried, gets pushed back, and you can read about that in the book. And then it's quiet. It's kind of forgotten about till Martin Luther King picks it up in '67. It says, we need an economic bill of rights. And he starts laying out, we need jobs for everybody, for all people. We need housing. And so he puts out forward, and if you all remember, some of you are old like me in this room, if you remember back in '68, his Poor People's Campaign were 3 of those rights he was fighting for. A basic income, public work for all, and the third was 5 million housing units. That was his demand when he was assassinated on April 4th. He was going to go to D.C. and shut down D.C. for those 3 aspects, those 3 economic rights. So the book discusses 6 of them. Can't do them all, I would love to, but that's why you're going to buy the book now. 6, and here's how it's framed. Here's how it's framed. Problem, history, and solution. So every one of those looks at the problem. So in 4 or 5 pages, here's the problem. Here's where we are. And it's analysis. And then history. Because sociology, by the way, we don't do a very good job in history. It's kind of like we start right in where it's now, but there's 200 years of history. So I go back and say, here's the history with that right. Here's how we got to that problem. And then solution. And I try to say, here are 4 to 6 contemporary solutions that is getting us close to those constitutional commitments, those constitutional amendments that he put forward, FDR. So I'm going to talk about 2. The first one, the right to a job. I believe this addresses the structural flaw of capitalism of not producing enough jobs. And I believe the Congress, and when you do the history, the Congress got it right in 1978. They passed a bill, the Humphrey-Hawkins Act. It was based, and this was interesting, when you do research, what's fun is like you learn stuff when you do all this research. So I uncovered, guess who's behind the Humphrey-Hawkins Act, this Full Employment Act of 1978? Coretta Scott King. She was the one that in '74, several years after Martin's death and assassination, she decides, I am going to make this idea of jobs for all a reality. And so she starts organizing. Not told, but she starts organizing in the community, reaching out to faith leaders, to union leaders, and then reaches out to Jimmy Carter, who eventually becomes president, and signs it. And she's there in '78 on the day, and she says, this is the fulfillment of my husband's dream. This is the fulfillment, jobs for all. How come that story is not told on Martin Luther King Day? To me, it's a really important part of the legacy that's not told. I think we know why it's not told, but I think it's critical. But this is what the Humphrey-Hawkins bill said. It's important, which, by the way, is still in effect. Humphrey-Hawkins is still on. I actually I was calling Congress. Is it still on the books? Because I don't see it ever being taken off. And you'll see why it's important that it's still on the books in a second. It says this, quote, Congress finds the nation has suffered substantial unemployment and underemployment over long periods of time and recognizes that general economic policies alone, i.e. capitalism in its hand, right, its hidden hand, alone have been unable to achieve full employment, and all the other policies up to that point. They've been unable to achieve full employment. And what's the solution Humphrey-Hawkins puts forward? Is public works. And he says, the Act says any time, this is going up, still in effect, any time unemployment drops below 3%, massive public works is the response. The president is supposed to order massive public works. So we don't need to enact anything. We just need to say, implement what's already on the books and fund it. And I realize after you run a campaign against our powers that be in San Jose that, spent $1.5 million, I'm not naive. I understand the powers against that, but I also understand that an idea that has vision, it's possible. In the book, I go on to discuss the 120-year story of Americans calling for public work to achieve the right to a job. I go back to the 1880s when cities did it. I go back to 1894, the first March on Washington, 1894. It's a national march from all over the country. You know what it's for? Public works. Jacob Coxey takes 5,000 men from across the country for public works. And of course, I discussed 30 years later FDR's programs, which, it gets talked about every once in a while. It's usually talked about as a failure. Yeah, it didn't solve right? That's the story. Didn't solve the unemployment crisis. What solved it? We all told? War. That's right. The war solved it. All of that's, okay, that's fair. That's a fair analysis up to a point until you realize that the unemployment went from 1933 of 24%. By 1940, it was 10% when you included public workers. The greatest single drop in the history of the country, and then down to 2% with that. And by the way, all the public work officials were like, give us more dollars and we can hire more people. So it was a political reason. It wasn't an economic one. It was actually being successful. And so what did they do? You know, they hired 10 million workers. It killed me when, I mean, I like President Obama. He's a nice guy. I like him. He's really important. But he said he couldn't do anything about it directly. No, he could have done something. He could have passed executive orders like FDR did, because FDR signed executive orders to create the public works and then called on the Congress to fund it. So it could have happened that way. Didn't happen. This is what they did. You know, 2,500 hospitals they built, 9,000 parks, 43,000 schools. Here's a key number for me, 125,000 bridges. You know why I like that number? Guess how many bridges we have structurally flawed in our country right now? 125,000 structurally flawed bridges. So let's get those civil engineers building those bridges, and we could do it through public works. We really literally, and my favorite number is they planted 3 billion trees. They literally built the infrastructure we utilize today. So in the book I talk about that, but I talk about public work models that are contemporary as well. I talk about this one, and we don't hear much about it, but our President Obama and the Congress, they passed a $1.3 billion. Small change in the world of poverty, you know, and where we spend our money. Small change, but it created 260,000 jobs. 260,000 jobs. And they were for human service, they were in business, and they were in government. But they were subsidized jobs. I'll give you one example. Perry County, Tennessee. You ever heard of Perry County, Tennessee? I hadn't until I heard about this, and I was like, I want to read more about Perry County. Because they said, we wish we had the WPA, but we don't have a work progress, so we're going to do a subsidized job program. And in 2 years, they decreased unemployment from 27% to 14% in Perry County, Tennessee. So you could do something directly to impact the lives of people. And I talk about other programs, Put Illinois to Work, 31,000 jobs. Los Angeles had 10,000. But these were small efforts, but they could be much, much larger. In the book, I talk about actually my work and the students that also worked on this Gulf Coast Civic Works Act, which was an attempt to do a public works after Hurricane Katrina, so that's highlighted. I talk about the San Antonio plan, which doesn't get much press. It passed recently a $596 million bond for infrastructure. And fifth and finally, I look at the cooperative movement, and specifically Evergreen. And what Evergreen, it's a cooperative in Cleveland, creating 500 jobs in a community where the average income is $18,000, mostly African American. And they're creating 500 jobs in 10 businesses through co-ops and having these folks as worker owners, where they get paid, start at 10, they move to $16, but in 8 years, they've got $65,000 of equity for themselves to buy a house. So to me, that's another way of creating jobs and living wage jobs. So the second right I'm going to talk about is this right to a living wage, which brings us to the minimum wage and others. And it addresses the other kind of side of the structural flaw of capitalism, not enough jobs and then not enough good paying jobs. Currently today, these are kind of stunning numbers for us, I think, 28% of all US jobs pay poverty wages. So just get around that fact. 28% of all the jobs in the United States pay poverty wages. So if you have that, you're going to get a lot of poverty, right? Just there's no way around it, unless then you get dads working those second jobs, and then they're not around for the kids' education. And so then there's like, hey, why are you around for the kids' education? Well, I'm working 2 jobs. So this is, I look at this as this anti-poverty is also a pro-family agenda. Today, 103 million Americans, or 1/3 of the U.S. population, live in a family with a household income below $36,000. 1/3, 100 million. It's hard for us in Silicon Valley maybe to get that, but 103 million, a third of the U.S. population. Incredibly, half of all jobs pay this $36,000 a year, and a quarter of all jobs pay $22,000 a year. Of course, the poverty line is about $22,000 for a family of 4. Even the recovery that we're in right now, right? Everyone's talking about the recovery. Even the recovery has not helped, as 58% of all the jobs that are being created right now are at poverty level. Today, the United States has the largest proportion of low-wage work in the industrialized world. And looking into the future, because we try to project, looking into the future, it's not going to be any different. The analysis says that by 2020, the same level of poverty level jobs is going to be, we're going to be at that same level. So poverty is our present, and poverty is our future, unless we do something different. My dad, I don't know, I used to play professional tennis, so my dad would say if I was losing, do something different. Like drop shot, lob, try something, because what you're doing now is losing, so try something. So I kind of have that attitude. We know where we're going, let's try something different. So what are some of these policies? So with this large commitment of a this constitutional commitment of a living wage, so what are some of those? One of them is bring up the bottom. We did it at minimum wage, right? And now there are further examples. San Francisco's at 15. Oakland, in a couple of weeks, is going, they're going to take our claim of having the greatest single increase in the history. They're going from $9 to $12.25. So that's a $3 increase. So they'll have that right. So good for them. Albuquerque, of course, increased in 2012. Los Angeles right now is going to 12. They're talking to 12.25. And of course, we have Sunnyvale and Mountain View. You know, those radical hotbeds of it's incredible, right? Our own small community say, no, we have to at least match San Jose, but they did something different. Did you all follow that in the press? Sunnyvale and Mountain View not just matched San Jose, but they committed themselves to $15 by 2018. So good for them. They went on record. We're going to go to we're going to go to $15, which in some levels is a challenge back to San Jose to say, what is San Jose going to do in light of, because the argument was always, they're going to go, like jobs are going to go, like, you know, over to Campbell, right? If you remember that, people are going to drive from here to Sunnyvale to get a hamburger, but what about the gas to get over there? But they didn't address it. They're going to, but other places are now taking the lead and pushing it up higher in light of where, you know, this inequality. So one is the minimum wage campaigns. The second one is I analyze the fight for 15. So you've, of course, heard, right, recently, Walmart has just increased, you saw that in the paper, to $9 and soon to 10. So that is a direct result of all this work. But, you know, the workers, our Walmart campaign is to try to go to 15. So we'll see how that all plays out. But there's this fight for 15. Fast Food Forward in New York. The Workers Organizing Committee of Chicago, they just opened up a branch in Oakland. There's this movement for 15, which is about $25,000 a year. So getting closer to a living wage. Guaranteed basic income. I talk about this, and this is an idea. What I found was interesting is a lot of people, again, would put me in the camp of you're a progressive or a liberal, but a lot of these ideas historically have come out of the right. The guaranteed income is the idea of Milton Friedman, hardly a liberal, if you know Milton Friedman's background, conservative. And this idea was also the idea of Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, president, a Republican, put forward a family plan that would give a basic income for all people. And so this idea of a basic income, so you take the money that would normally go into housing and to other cash payments, and it would be a basic income that would be at one level. And so I don't know if you saw, Switzerland is the country that's going to vote on this, the first opportunity to put in really kind of practice in recent memory of a basic income. And they're putting $2,800. That's going to be on the vote coming up this year. That they'll have, everyone would receive that amount, and that would in one stroke eliminate poverty. Right? If everyone had $2,800, you get rid of poverty in one stroke. So that is being put forward by Switzerland, and I highlight this movement of a basic income. The earned income tax credit is another important, I think that is an idea, it's an American idea again here, an EITC, again started by do y'all know who started it? A Republican, President Ford, supported by President Reagan. I always like to put myself in the camp of President Reagan, you know, because what's the word? It depoliticizes. Because President Reagan said about the Works Progress Administration, it gave a job to my father. It was incredibly important. He hated welfare, but public works he had not a problem with. So I think, you know, Reagan said that. If I was the president, which it has no chance, but if I was president, I would have gone in front of Ronald Reagan's airport and announced these plans of public work and a living wage, because these are ideas that Reagan had supported. Reagan said this about the earned income tax credit, which started small, $400 to $6 million. It's now at $28 million. Low and moderate income families receive it. Up to $6,000 they receive. Generally around $2,000 is kind of the average, but they can get up to $6,000. And this is something that can be expanded to actually address this idea of a living wage. So Reagan said, it's the best anti-poverty bill, the best pro-family measure, and the best job creation program ever to come out of Congress. So I'm a Reaganite. I think I put ourselves right in with Ronald Reagan on this. Cooperatives, so again, I've talked about them before, and I talk about the history of them, but again, they're a way to bring up on this living wage. They provide $16 an hour, and they actually provide equity, wealth, over this 8-year period if they're long enough. And then I talk about the impact of public work on, because other nations have done public work. India has done public work, several African nations have done some public work, and people have studied that, and what they found is they increase 5 to 10% the overall wages by having public work. So that's another way to lift up the bottom. So I've talked about these first two rights, the problems behind them, the history of them, and some practical solutions to what I would say, these are rights, but to right the wrongs that are going on in our society. And there's 4 more, and I'm prepared to talk to at least one more, but I think I just stop and then hear from you, and even better, buy the book and read about them. And then my big thing is is how to get this idea out. I'm open to any, I'm a person interested in ideas, so how to get this idea out is one of my passions right now, is talking to people about how to enter into a dialogue about an economic bill of rights for the country. So here's my hope that you've got 3 things. One, that my wife said to start with a story and always go with 3 things. So this is a tribute to my wife. 1, people can bring about change. 2, there's a viable framework called the Economic Bill of Rights that can unite our various interests, whether it be in jobs, housing, healthcare. And 3, there are workable solutions to our economic rights that we all could be involved in. So I think I'm going to stop there and then hear from you. And if you have the passion and desire, I can go on with one more right and go from there. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it to you and you might have some questions. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
So Scott, I've read your book and I love it. I think it's great. So
that's my favorite line. Go ahead. Keep going.
And you give me some discount.
Yeah, sorry. Next question.
But as we talk about rights in this country, there's also been this push over the last 20, 30 years about responsibilities, right? And so there's always this obligation that accompanies this right.
Yep.
So what and how do we also call our society, and from the 1% to the 99%, to the obligation to fulfill those rights?
Yeah. So I guess my thing is, I'm a structural person, so I think kind of in structural terms. I try when I talk to my class in sociology, I try to say, like, this is a building, right? And so just like this is a building, society has walls and it has doors, and some are open for some and some are more closed. So I think in terms like, what's the structure? So I guess I would argue, how do we create structures for people to meet their obligations? So I'll give you one example. So work. A lot of people, maybe half the country, would say work is caused by people being lazy. Or why is there poverty? You always hear, they're lazy. People don't want to work because they're lazy. I would argue that if you create the right structure, you could actually have, that would not stop the reality. And so I think the best example that I can give out of that is, so there was a study done where women in an extremely poor community were asked, if you could be on welfare, out of these 600 women, all poor, if you could be on welfare, or if you could have a job that provided a living wage and childcare for your child and healthcare, what would you do? What would you choose? What do you think the answer to the 600 women was?
All 600.
599 women chose the job. 1 chose welfare. So again, that's my response, is you create the structure, people will do, I think that's how I think human nature is. People will do it, the right thing, if the right structure. But if it's with no health care, if they could stay on welfare and get health care, right, they will, or if they would make other choices. So I think that we create structures that make people have to do the right thing. I don't know if that's a good enough answer for you, but that's how I see it.
That's part of the equation. I'm looking also at the obligation of those that need to say, we've got to pay for this, right? So through taxes, through incentives, through tax, doing this exchange of taxes and tax credits.
Yeah.
Moving to that level of saying, okay, yeah, I'm in. I'm willing to have to pay more, or have a little less, so more can have others. Others can have more. What's
okay? So
in the American society, great individualism.
I get you.
Versus the barn raising
tradition.
Thing, right? How do we build on the barn raising tradition versus the the individualist?
It's a great. I mean, if I had the answer, I would be maybe farther around. But I guess I don't address in the epilogue. So if you read the book, when you get to the epilogue, I address the tax question there, because I think it's kind of like this. When JFK said we're going to the moon, he didn't start off saying okay, it's going to cost the nation X amount of dollars to get us to the moon. Because I think if you go there, you're not going to have the vision to get us there. So I'm starting with that vision, and I think once you have the vision of it, then you're going to get the people to do the right thing, what I would say. So let's just talk about the taxes and that whole question. We already spend, when it comes to the two other, let's say two rights, when it comes to education and when it comes to healthcare, we actually already spend the most of both those. So we're already spending money. My question would be is, where's the money going and who's getting the money? We have the best healthcare for the top 20%. So how do we see, my question is maybe a spiritual one, how do we see our brother as our brother, you know, and that we're in it together? So I think I hear you, I mean, we're in individuals. So I guess, again, King would say this question is like, you know, he'd say, I'm against, you know, let's say communism because it doesn't provide individual rights. I'm against, you know, or it provides, it doesn't provide individual rights. Capitalism doesn't provide collective rights. So we need a balance between the individual and the collective. And I think this Economic Bill of Rights offers that, of this balance between the individual, our political rights and our responsibilities around that, and our economic rights. So I don't know if that's fully, but if you have answers on that, let's form a coalition, because I think that's going to be a big challenge. Like, how do you, but I guess here's the other reality. And I hate to say this, but when I look at history, when does major change happen?
Crisis.
Crisis, thank you. So crisis. So we missed a huge opportunity in 2008. There was a crisis upon us, one like the country hadn't seen for 100 years. And we missed that opportunity. But I'm going to say this, again, you might not like it, it's coming. Because the structure has not been changed. So it's coming. Another crisis is coming, and can we be ready for that crisis to offer a vision? So I think it's when crisis happens, and a crisis is coming, so I'm saying let's organize and let's be better prepared for the next time it happens and get our opportunity. Yeah.
Well, your analysis correctly, I think, leans heavily on the idea of creating more jobs, and you speak eloquently about public works. But you haven't talked about reshoring the jobs that have been exported. And it's not only the jobs that have been exported, but it's the capital investments that have been exported. Do you have any ideas about reshoring jobs here in Silicon Valley, having a program in which a tech assembly plant is located in a low-income community in San Jose, and you create 20,000 new jobs that way?
Well, you know, I just say, I think it's a great idea, so I'm going to research that. I haven't done that thinking. Have you done that thinking?
I have.
I'm interested.
You want to hear more?
Yeah, let's share.
Well, here's an illustration. If you simply brought 20% of the jobs that have been offshore back to the United States, you would have enough jobs to create 40,000 new jobs in 6 of the most blighted cities in the country. Now, that kind of mathematical model probably won't last 30 seconds under intense criticism, but on the other hand, the central dynamic of this recent period of time has been booming Silicon Valley, not only booming technology, but the ideology of technology as the way we're going to grow everything.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm interested.
But if you, just 20%, if you reshored 20% of the jobs, it'd have huge impact on unemployment and wages and everything else in this country.
And I think Silicon Valley is what a great place to have the conversation, because we are the tail, right, of the two. I mean, 6 blocks from my house, and San Jose State was the jungle, and the largest homeless encampment in the United States. So here we are, with our Adobes and our Googles, and we have the jungle. And I think the students, I don't know how, for the Santa Clara folks, that's the issue that's really grabbed them. Like this difference. And my students are, they actually have gone down many times to now the encampments. I know working, talking with Michael, that they're interested, that they see it. It's like it's the living manifestation of extreme inequality, and the most visual. And so I think that also, that crisis provides us some opportunity around, and one of the things I talk about in the book is this rapid rehousing idea. So the students have been exploring like what Utah is doing. Utah, I don't know if you've been following Utah. There was a little funny skit on
SNL.
And it was also on Comedy Central.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it's hilarious. So go on Comedy Central and look up the Jon Stewart show where they interview the guy from Salt Lake City, the homeless director, and they've cut homelessness by 72% in Salt Lake. And so it's like they were like, where did you put them? No, we house them. We give rapid rehousing, wraparound services, but only if they want it. But they got them off the streets and into long-term housing. So I think this model, one of many that can be done, is some of the solutions that my students are brainstorming and thinking about, and what can we do here, to kind of at a large scale. But I'm interested, so let's talk afterwards. Yeah, Paul.
So thanks, first of all, Scott, for your enduring work. And I agree that I think a huge part of the solution is from government investment. And that, I think really that's what you're saying, is that the government should invest the way Roosevelt did, et cetera. But it still leaves us with this structural inequality where, the 1% still exists, where unions have strangled every municipality in the country, where, there's so many, where you have California it does not have enough for its education system because of the tax structure.
Yeah.
So how do we both simultaneously encourage the government investment, as you're talking about, and try to mitigate this other structural stranglehold on the country? A lot of people talk about use Ferguson as what's choking people, but this is what's choking people.
Yeah. So mine again is like, because I thought about how to structure the book, right? And so I decided to focus on the clarion call and focus there first, and then get people to have that, because people aren't even thinking, first of all, people don't even know about the economic. If I started a class, on the first day of class, we're going to talk about the Economic Bill of Rights. Out of my 50, sometimes now 55 students, how many will say that? Oh, I know what that is. You know how many? None. So to go to where you're asking to go before we haven't even educated the population about what the vision is, I just felt like it was too far down the line. So in the epilogue, I talk about what's going to take. I really believe that, and this is where I'm practical. I'm just personally a practical idealist. Is that I don't care how we get there, as long as we get there.
Right.
And so that's why I don't say here's the one solution.
Right.
I say here's the vision. Here are 6 or 7 contemporary solutions, and they're kind of from the right and left. Try some of these to get us closer. And I just don't feel like I have anything to say about.
I'll just throw another idea out there too. I mean, I work in philanthropy, and so philanthropy as a percentage of GDP is 2% of the GDP. If we just raised it 1%, right, that gives everybody, all individuals, the possibility of investing at whatever capacity they can. And a great book on this is Giving by Bill Clinton. He talks about people who are dirt poor who are helping people under them.
Yeah.
Right? And so it could be service, it could be time, it could be labor, and it could be cash. But even if we raise that a little bit, it's a democratizing effort to raise all boats.
Well, Carol Lee Hutton from United Way talks about that, right? We're in Silicon Valley, we actually give less than most other communities, and here we are in Silicon Valley.
Right.
So I agree, and I looked at, and there are hints in my book, let's put it that way. So for example, I talk about the most recent HUD director who said this. He says, look, right now we spend $2 billion on homelessness. With a $20 billion investment, $20 billion in rapid rehousing, we could end homelessness in our country. Right? So it's investment, right? And we've been unwilling for all sorts of, we understand the ideological reasons, but I think that with a vision, you can start getting to say, how do we get to that investment? Yeah, so let's go here and then here. Go.
A statement and then a question.
Yeah.
So in 1965, I read a book during the war on poverty.
Yeah.
Called 6 Negro Men That Failed. It was about the poverty program investment in people who, when they came close to success, panicked and got drunk and left their jobs. I'm dealing now, 50 years later, with people on Coyote Creek where I hired a guy to do cleanups twice a week. He just needed to go to the downtown streets team meeting every Wednesday. He missed 2 of the 3 meetings he was supposed to. What's aware is there's also been a historical cultural degradation for which this program needs some additional cognizance of the cultural problem we have with eliminating poverty. So that was my question is 2 questions. these ideas are not new. The question is, how do you sell them?
That's right.
To this culture? And secondly, more importantly, is there something that could be done at the local level? Given that Silicon Valley rate of philanthropy is lower than any other comparable city in the country, comparable in terms of dollars per capita income, it doesn't bode well for doing something locally, but could it? In other words, could you create a healthcare system? Could you say, we are going to create affordable housing? The current plan for affordable housing, we need $500 million of money for. Could we do that locally? And if so, how can we link your book to a public relations campaign that can actually sell these ideas to a community and have an initiative on the ballot to fund it?
Well, yeah. Yes, let's do that. So I'm all for it. So the minimum wage was an attempt at that, right? We couldn't, you know, my students, the day we won the campaign, they had a picture, they took a picture of President Obama, you know, one of the stand-ups of President Obama, and they said, and it's not his fault, right? You talked about it, but we did it. From their perspective, they felt that way. So you talked about it, but we did it. So I think that the feeling is that's what that was about, right? That you could do it locally. I do think we should do it locally. We've got to give examples. The county, I've been talking to Supervisor Chavez, and the county is working on right now, they didn't say public works, but it's basically what it is for youth right now. I think it's 500 jobs for youth over the summer. That's a public works vision from the county level. So I think we should try all of these ideas. I talk about in the book of a mayoral candidate in New York City that talked about creating a single payer system, kind of a Medicare for all in New York City. So I think there's ways to think about these solutions at the county, but ultimately it's got to be, and I think it's a real challenge. I have to say this personally, because I was saying this earlier. So I love being in San Jose State, and I'm sure everyone loves being in Santa Clara. We love being where we are. But my feeling about San Jose State is one of the challenges is as I try to get these ideas up and out, really who do they want to talk to when it comes to inequality? You know who they want to talk to? Harvard folks, Princeton folks, right? Maybe Reich over here, he's a great guy, right? Cal. It's a challenge for, I mean, I guarantee, let's put it this way. If the students at Harvard had raised minimum wage in Boston, they would have been on the front cover of Time magazine. Dang. That's all I have to say. And our students were, King talks about the rainbow. You know, actually Jackson, but talks, you know, King talks about this vision of diversity. The students were the vision of diversity. Black, Latino, Asian, white, all together working for a common goal. That's what I call it, right? And so if I had to now go back after thinking, I would have added another line, which was an economic bill of rights to eliminate poverty and maybe rebuild the middle class. Because I think it's exactly what you're talking about. Is really, because if you look at that median income, 57,000 to 51,000, right? And people have felt that, the downward spiral of the middle class and that anxiety. And I think you're right, it's when the middle and the folks on the, you know, from the 50 to the 20 at the bottom start seeing their interests aligned, we can have change. So I agree 100%, and I'll continue to try to articulate myself, but I agree with you. Yeah. We'll go back to me.
My name is Phil Black. I'm a Catholic worker, so I beg your patience while I kind of formulate this thought.
Yeah, please.
I can see the case, and the statistics and the stories are strong to make this case for this. But one of the things I don't think we're really putting our finger on is how we do it, and you've said so much, and I've admired what you did with the students. I would say that 100 years ago, the dominant institution for the poor were the churches and the labor unions and the settlement houses. Today, and those provided the platform from which they could act. Okay? Today, despite the great work that's being done by faith-based community organizing projects, I've been employed by them, worked for them for years, the dominant institution of the poor is the social service providers, the nonprofits. And the dominant culture there is United Way, and they do great work raising funds and bringing a mindset to the work, pedagogy to their work, and an academic discipline is incredible. But I don't look, with the exception of one or two around the country that I've seen in Northern California, Boston, Chicago, I don't see them engaging in civic development, except for perhaps Sacred Heart. Okay? Pancho's doing that kind of work, but he's kind of alone. I look around and I don't see I see policy people, I see professional advocates, but I don't see grassroots organizing, leadership development occurring amongst the constituency whom they serve, which would be necessary to bring this about, like you did with the students. You provided a I mean, I'm a structuralist too, okay? So when you talk to me about youth, I don't understand, but if you talk to me about the kids on the 19th Avenue, Crips, I get that. Or the students at San Jose State, I know who you're talking about. They're in there, I can count them. So structurally, how do we go to the nonprofits where the poor go and rely on increasingly, and say it's in your self-interest to organize your constituency? And maybe we need to have a means to do it, because I'm not sure we figured that out. I don't think Pancho's figured. I mean, he'll tell you that much. He hasn't figured. He's figuring it out. He's working on it. But there ought to be 10 other nonprofits in Silicon Valley that are doing the same kind of work, and then we can share best practices. We could maybe, talk to people in LA, talk to people in Phoenix, talk to people in Denver, talk to people in Dallas, talk to people in Kansas City. So, the academic world is a great way to spread that kind of expertise.
Well, let me tell you two stories from the minimum wage. One is Pancho. I mean, literally, it was just, that whole summer was just 8 students, Pancho. Right? It was Pancho, right? In my house, talking and thinking, and how are we going to do this? And one time, Pancho, we were having some debate, and he had to leave. He says, "Look, I don't care if we win or lose, but we've got to do it. We've got to do this." Because there was some question: is it the right thing to do? Do we have the money? Do the poll? It's like, I don't care. Let's do it. And he was the one, right? So there's that. And let me give you the story of Carolee Hutton. So the minute I knew we were going to win the minimum wage in campaign was when United Way came out and said we're supporting Measure D. The minute I heard that, I was like, oh, it's over. If United Way is behind us, and they said they're going to put some behind it, there's nothing the Chamber of Commerce or there is, I don't care how much money they give, and they gave a ton. I think 1.5 million. It's over $1 million, closer to 1.5. You know how much we spent? I think barely $100,000 on the campaign, if that. But yes, the minute when she came in, that's my point. It was like when we had that one other outlier beside Pancho, and there were others, of course, Catholic Charities and others, but it was really when I thought United Way came in strong. And then, by the way, she got there were some calls made. What are you doing, right? And she said, no, we have to take this stand. But I think I think you're right. We need more organizations, and we need more people I think taking kind of making those, a nonprofit can do that. They can come out in favor of a proposition, right? And so that was the difference. And a lot of times they feel like he can't be maybe involved in political work, but in this case they could.
Well, especially in the context of leadership to civic development.
Yeah.
Because then then the issue is a case study, but what you're really looking at is you're developing capacity. And so, I mean, I don't honestly care what a group decides to work on as long as they learn from that and learn how to then change their world.
Yep.
What I hear him getting to is that the people that are most affected by the issue organizing. And that was your students, who are also my staff. That's right. Doing that. And then for being able to develop the capacity within the nonprofit sector to develop our expertise about how to organize our constituents, so that it's not this top-down model, but it's really engaged. Yes. So I'm in.
I'm in too. When do you put us together to start?
Oh, as soon. Yeah.
Let's go here and then here.
Yeah.
So I'm intrigued by the question: to what extent has there been any systematic polling of the electorate on each of the topic areas of what can we do here locally that there's already sort of a cultural base that's further ahead than the elected officials? And I ask this because in 1986, the Berkeley School District had a crisis. I did some research, said, well, we just need to do a tax measure. The right-wing extremists, which was the Berkeley Democratic Club, and the left group, which was the Berkeley Citizens Action, were both agreed that a tax measure could never pass, with the right group not wanting a tax measure to pass because they felt that would benefit the other group, and the other group feeling that things were so rancorous that it was not possible. Well, we got the parents involved and we passed the thing with 75% of the vote because the polls showed that despite the politicians, 63% of the people were already there. So that's, I'm just wondering, maybe there are individual elements like the minimum wage that could, like maybe it's housing for middle class and the poor. Maybe it's,
so here's something that where the the academic world can be supportive. So when we said we were interested in doing this, and we went out, the students and Pancho and a few others went out, and people were like, "Well, what's the data?" Like, we don't have any data. We just know it's the right thing to do. So they said, "We're not doing anything until we get polling." So we then had to fundraise, and a general poll costs like $40,000. And so, but because we have connections to the university, they said, well, if you bring in people to man or human the phones, we'll give it to you for $6,000. So that's a huge break. So we did that for we raised $6,000. In fact, some of you probably donated to that. $100 donations. We got $6,000, and then we put it forward. And when we found out when we did the poll, 70% of San Joseans supported minimum wage. And they said, and I'm not a politician, so the Politico said, you're going to lose 10%. When they come in with $1 million, you're losing 10. So it's got to be at least 60. If you're poll at 60, because you're going to lose 10. So we were at 70, and you know what we went to? 60. We were right on the nose. The number was exactly right, and the 10% was the exact number we lost with the Chamber and the Restaurant Association saying this was going to destroy the economy. So there it was.
So you've done it.
Yeah. So, but I think the poll, for the political people in the world, they want to see if they're going to invest their time and energy, is it going to win? Because ultimately, and I think if you look even back to King, it's like there has to be victories, and that's why the minimum wage is so important, because we had a victory. So what else? I'm with you. What else can we do that is victorious? And on a small level, I was involved in working with Mountain View and Sunnyvale to get those up, and that's important because they're actually looking at the other cities in the community, Cupertino, Santa Clara. We're in Santa Clara, for goodness sake. Any Santa Clarans who would live here, but going to their city council, they match San Jose.
Maybe even Palo Alto.
And right now, that's already happening. It's on the, and they're talking about much higher than maybe even 15. They have a city council member, so we should be 20. So that's a debate for them to have. Let them have, but that's a good debate to have. What is living? Yeah.
So, I mean, I want to think from the totally other side of this problem. Capitalism is ingrained in our society. We all are, they have benefited from capitalism. If I look at my life, I wouldn't be where I am if, as an individual, I couldn't take part in the opportunities out there. So, from a capitalistic perspective, we have examples where companies like Costco or companies like Starbucks, hugely profitable, but doing good by their employees.
Yep.
Costco pays $22 an hour minimum wage. So how do we capitalize on those examples and work from both sides?
Yeah, we should. Absolutely. And I think Walmart is responding, right? Walmart wouldn't be doing that if there wasn't this grassroots push.
Well, Walmart in the retail survey was the worst company for 2 years in a row.
I know.
So they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because the labor market is squeezing them. They're doing it for PR. And they recognize that it's good for their company.
That's right.
So how do we kind of, encourage that kind of activity from the capitalism side?
So I'm a Kingian again. And Kingian, King was interested in a guy named Hegel. Like the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, right? This was his thinking. So I'm like, he'd say this on the exact same question. It's like, we need agape. We need to promote agape, this love of humanity. And people will do, and some people will do the right thing because of that. And we need to promote that. So he was about that, promoting agape. And then he would say, but some people need coercion. Some people need to be coerced to do the right thing, and we need that too. So we have to have both. We have to have the moral persuasion argument for agape, and then we need the coercion to say, no, we're going to pass a minimum wage, which is whatever that is for the community, the basic level. So I would say we do both and both are acceptable. But one without the other is not going to be enough. So I would say yes, and let's do both.
I would just say to add
Right.
on to that, there's a lot of evidence now, and there's a lot of research that demonstrates paying a higher wage is better for retention, better for productivity. And so I think use the people who are doing it, the Costco's and the Starbucks, as evidence to say to other companies, look, this really works. This is for your benefit, for your bottom line.
And whenever we talk about minimum wage, we never have like me or we go to Phil's Coffee. You know, let's let a small businessman go up and say, look we've done this, it hasn't harmed our business at all. In fact, it's helped our business.
Right.
So really let people from the community speak. I think that's important, right, just on a PR. I think that they have to be the ones rather than an academician saying it's a good thing. So we have those folks that are being directly impacted. Just tell the story. Okay.
Thank you. Scott,
thank you so much.
Very much. Thank you very much. Professor Sandstrom had to leave, but I want to thank Bill and Drew for all the food and the support we get. This is a partnership between Step Up and the Levy School of Business, and we couldn't have done it without that thinking of how do you take research out to the community and make it a practical application so that Scott doesn't have to talk a lot about it, but we can make it actionable. So if any of you are interested in taking something, I don't know what it is, that you're interested in having a little convening happening around Scott's idea, please let Adeline know. Send us email, and then we'll be happy to convene, and then we'll find somebody to take it forward. It doesn't have to be Step Up, but we love to have people with different thinking and ideas to put them together, and then it's amazing what they come up with. I can tell you one great success story that's coming really close to our community is the Savings Circle, because the Education Foundation found it to be very, very interesting. And it came from Step Up, and I'm very proud of that. But it didn't come because I said it. Somebody from the group said, we're going to move with this one. And today, the same thing. I would love to see that happen. Another thing is, we do have poverty simulations. Any of you interested in participating in poverty simulation, please let Adeline know. The other thing that we wanted to do is make sure that you buy Scott's book, because I asked him to bring some. So his books are here. He can sign them. One way we can support
Absolutely.
the starving professors, although I have to say he's not one of them. But still can support him. Thank you so much.
So it's $25 if you want to buy it. Love it to have it.